capture key ideas. We want to talk about first this book, write it down and make it happen, knowing what you want and getting it. Writing it down is one of the first steps to actually making it happen. And I know you use this in your daily life, Chris. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. So people ask me all the time, Chris, how do you stay organized? How do you track all your things? I'm old school, so I have a notebook. I believe that's one of the best ways to keep track of your ideas. So any action item that I have, I write it down on my notebook. I put a due date beside it. And I actually have a discipline and a practice of every Friday afternoon for 1 hour. I have some time blocked on my calendar, and I actually call that time planning time. I use that time that's blocked for me. It's protected for my time. You review the interactions and notes for the week. I go back and look at the action items that I've written down, and then I strategize about what do I need to do in the next month. And I think, what are the meetings I have to set up? What agreements do I have to make? And I actually use that time to actually set up online meetings with people and actually include desired outcomes in the calendar meeting itself. So when someone gets the invitation from me, it doesn't just say, Chris is requesting time with you from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock on a Tuesday. They actually see, by the end of this meeting, we will have, and I've listed some proposed desired outcomes. That's really helpful because it lets people know what they're accepting and what they're in for.
And I do the same thing, Chris. I normally do Sunday evening or Monday early. I have a calendar book I've used for 4 or 5 years called The Inner Guide. And it actually helps you set up goals and intentions for 9 different areas of your life for the year, for each month, and then makes you check back on the month and see what you've accomplished, what challenges you have, and even set weekly intentions and write down what you're grateful for. And I use that because it really helps to write it down and actually make it happen. I think writing it down is the first step to making it happen, and then kind of visualizing the next things that you're going to do to actually make it happen. So let's get it back to meetings though. And how do we know what ideas to actually write down?
Yeah, that's a great question, Eve. I'm glad you asked it. We have a concept called Grab It. And this concept is all about scanning for key ideas, calling them out, and ultimately writing them down. And you can see below there's some examples of things that you can scan for, things like proposals, things like questions that people have, ultimately agreements. So how does this actually show up? One way this may show up is you've been in a meeting and maybe somebody says, that's a great idea. Let's meet next week to talk about that. And the other person says, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And then the conversation just stops. Nobody wrote it down. The meeting leader, the facilitator can say, hey, it sounds like we have a proposal or a next step to meet next week. Let's go ahead and actually capture that. Let's put it in our writing. Let's put it in our notes. And potentially let's build an agreement on what day and time and who will be invited. And I find it's useful that when you're building next step agreements, particularly, carve out 5 minutes at the end of the meeting specifically to review your next step action items and ultimately build those agreements. But at a minimum, in the flow of the meeting, go down to the bottom and actually write something that says like, build agreement on when we're going to meet next. It's really important to capture these ideas so you don't forget. So I'd like to explain a technique for running meeting notes and how that works. So let's go ahead and move on to that. So this is a really great technique if you have a team or a group of people that meets on a regular or frequent basis. Instead of having 10 or 15 different documents or meeting notes floating all around, actually having a single source document that you can collectively build off of each time you meet and call it running meeting notes. This is really powerful because it keeps all your information defined in a single file for easy reference. So you can go back and you can see, what did we talk about 6 weeks ago? What did we talk about last week? What were the agreements that we made last time? And just build entries on top of each other. So this is an example that I built in Microsoft Word. It's a very simple example. You can see there's an accounting team that's getting together. They're working on a new accounting system, and they're trying to define the roles and responsibilities of how they divide up and reimagine the execution of this new accounting system. So a couple pieces of critical information you'll see I've captured here. The first is the date. When is the meeting, when did it occur? You see a list of attendees, who was actually there. I have my desired outcomes listed. By the end of this meeting, we will have. And then further down, you'll see I have written meeting notes. This is really useful because if some participant isn't able to join the meeting, they can quickly go back and they can refer to the running meeting notes log, and they can quickly get up to speed about what the team talked about, what were the agreements that were made. And then lastly, you'll see I have a next step agreement box that I like to do. This is really simple as well. The key here is to have 3 columns. One column is who, the second column is what, and the third column is by when. And I like to tell people, make sure you fill out the table completely. If you've got a grid or you have a cell that's missing, you really haven't built a full agreement. I also like to order this by having the who at the beginning, because oftentimes in the meeting, you may have 6, 7, maybe 10 or 11 people, maybe 30 people in a meeting, and you may have a lot of different agreements with next steps and a lot of people that are supposed to take action items. If you're sending out meeting notes post-meeting, it's a lot easier for everyone to scan this grid and just find their name to the left and then hone in on what they have to do. That's a lot easier to do than to start the what and then get to the who and the by when. But this is a great way for accountability as well. If you have struggles of how do I get my team members or my team to hold themselves accountable and actually execute off what they said, writing it down is really powerful, and having the discipline of spending a few minutes at the beginning of the next meeting to review the prior agreements to say, okay, let's go through and see, did Ruth actually reach out to our sales group? Did Marie actually liaison with the system implementation team? Actually go through those things and see if they happen.